Right, let's start.
We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read. Oh.
Hey, everybody, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated GI Joe comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now, today we are looking at the Devil's Due era once again, and we are closing out the Brandon Jerwa era of GI Joe Disavowed with Snake Eyes Declassified issues 2 to 6, which came out from Devil's Due September 2005 to January 2006, just shortly after he had concluded his run on the main book. Now, I will not be talking about them on my own. I will be joined by my co-host. Unfortunately, on the way to recording, he was caught in a helicopter accident and is now mute, which might be an issue for an audio-only podcast. But let's Charlie Mike. Here he is. It's a real American, Tim.
That's funny because I actually had the mute button on my remote, on my microphone. This is the sound of me making with my fingers the letters CM in the sand, finger quotes, sand. So yes, we can Charlie Mike this episode of our podcast. Hello, listeners, and hello, Mark.
And I want to give out a big shout out to our many listeners in Costa Rica. I get regular sort of emails with some, statistics about our listening. And I've noticed that in recent weeks, we are doing well in Costa Rica. So either we've got some dedicated Costa Ricans there listening, or perhaps someone has gone on holiday and been downloading in Costa Rica. But yeah, if that is you, do feel free to give me a shout out and let me know. Good to have you on board. Regardless, Tim, so we are talking for the second time about Snake Eyes Declassified. Last time round, we covered issue 1 in some detail. We gave lots of extra background about what we thought about the overall project and some of the parallels to other similar things. Today, we are going to be covering issues 2 to 6. So we're going to be sort of hurtling through those issues. How do you feel about that, Tim? Do you think that sounds achievable?
Yeah, yes. So many of the sort of overall sort of starting topics or complaints are about the existence of this series, and that can nicely attach to our episode on issue 1, which was really our episode on the idea of this and issue 1. And now we can get into some nuts and bolts. I will certainly go back to the idea of this in today's episode.
Mm-hmm. So this was brought to us by the creative team of Brandon Jerwa on story, pencils Emiliano Santalucia and Robert Atkins, colors John Rauch with Jeremy Jensen, and letters Steve Seeley with Brian Crowley.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
On covers, it's Emiliano Santalucia with, interestingly, issue 3 flip cover, David Witt.
Which I can talk about, actually. Well, not very much. In issues 2 and 3, there is a full-page ad. There's a full-page house ad for Devil's Due covers that month. And the full-page ad is a photo of someone, a real person, and you can't quite see their face, and they're walking by a brick wall on a sidewalk, and on the brick wall are 8 large posters that the idea here is they've been wheat pasted to this brick wall. This is all just a Photoshop composite, and a fine one. And then on the bottom it says in big white, red and white letters, "Comics that rock! This October, All Devils Do Comics feature covers by nationally infamous rock poster artists Rich Black, Casey Burns, Jeff Gaither, and David Witt. Don't miss these covers in October. Cool art by the guys whose posters adorn America's city walls. Cool covers at your comic shop. Devils Do brings the rock!" So this David Witt Snake Eyes cover is actually a back cover for issue 3. And it is in a very different style than... so all 6 front covers for this series are black and white with some red, rendered as to be photorealistic, and they're all poetic or indirect, dramatic, setting the scenes. But this isn't like Mike Zeck's cover to issue 47 with 3 Joes and gritted teeth and speed lines and, machine guns and this, the first cover is Snake Eyes' arm in the rain, and the second cover is the headstone for Snake Eyes' sister in the snow, and the third cover is Snake Eyes from behind at the arch in front of Storm Shadow's home, and the fourth one is Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes back to back, facing away from each other, not touching, but dramatically not looking at each other, with a tree with a cherry blossom between them. And 5 is a bloody arrow through a wooden post, and 6, even though it's sort of the most traditional, it's not a glamour shot. It's a head and shoulders shot of Snake Eyes version 1, but it's from behind, and you see a little bit of scarlet reflected in his visor. And it's not a variant cover. It's just a back cover on issue 3 is a ink drawing of Snake Eyes version 2 with his Uzi and his sword in the rain, waist deep in the rain, and you're looking down at him, and there's some attitude, and it's very cool. And I wouldn't have, when I saw it, if I hadn't seen the ad first, I wouldn't have thought, this reminds me of a show poster, of a band poster, of a rock poster. But now that I know that that's what this artist is known for, I can definitely see how this is in that world. And if I couldn't put my finger on how this wasn't traditional comic book art, yes, otherwise I would have, if I had known anything else, I would have said, this guy's artwork reminds me a little bit of Paul Pope in how he inks, and it's black and white in one color.
And of course, you can't see those sort of concentric circles in the water from the rain without thinking of Brian Bolland and Killing Joke.
This is actually going to make a public service announcement. Hey, publishers, if you have to use your back cover as an ad to make money, or as a house ad to advertise another comic you publish or the next issue of this series, I get it. If you don't have anything better to do for your back cover, put some art there. My favorite example of this, in the 90s, Marvel very briefly had a format called magazine, which is the word magazine with a different vowel at the beginning, magazine. And it was a square bound sort of 4-in-1. It was 4 issues worth of comic published on then Marvel's sort of standard, like, highest quality newsprint. And it was for these like budget reprints that Marvel did just for about a year. And one of them had reprinted the first appearance of Star-Lord, of Peter Quill, soon to be a Guardian of the Galaxy. And John Byrne drew a new cover because he had drawn the original appearance, and Michael Golden seemingly also drew a new cover, but Marvel ran that as the back cover. And when I got it, it was really cool to have sort of 2 covers without, one of them without a logo, and sort of one of them didn't have to like carry the weight of being a cover, like fighting against all the other comics next to it for attention, or like being the best image possible to represent the interior, 2 covers for the price of one. I guess I'm answering my own question. Hey, publishers, why don't you do this more often? Because people can't see the back cover. And if a publisher has to pay an artist, they're paying more. So the answer really is to do variant covers. Anyway, let's talk about Snake Eyes Declassified.
Well, yeah, if you can do a variant cover, why not put the other cover on the back? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think though, Tim, probably the best thing to do is if on the back cover, if you've not got anything else, it's just to have it entirely black with the GI Joe logo. That's probably the best thing to do.
The thing about the last 50 or 100 issues of IDW's Real American Hero is that there was always a panel on the inside front cover from the story you were about to read. And I always thought, just do something like that for the back cover. Do one panel, or do one panel in black and white, or do the cover in black and white. Anyway, getting back to Snake Eyes Declassified, there is something of these 6 front covers that jumps out at me as quite different. And on the cover to number 3, I think, Mark, that all the architecture and the cherry blossoms are CG. I think they're 3D models. Would a comic book artist have been doing this in 2005? The reason why I say this is that the cherry blossoms seem the shadows on them are all so perfect. The cherry blossoms certainly look like 3D modeling. And I think I'm seeing just the slightest bit of anti-aliasing in the posts that are right near Snake Eyes. And the roof shingles, the Japanese roof shingles, look so small and finely detailed that they don't look drawn to me, even, drawn, photorealistically. Issue 1 on this arm, this is either someone looking at a photo of an arm and repainting it, or maybe someone tracing a painting on top of a photo of an arm. Whereas something about the issue 3 cover, the volume of these posts and the fine detail on the roof and the cherry blossoms looks in a different sort of visual language, even though it still fits because it's black and white and it's dramatic.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Hard to say.
In a way that, as a comparison, on the cover to issue 2, this headstone looks like it has been drawn.
Yeah.
It does not look like it was built with a computer. Okay, so just as an imperfect comparison, when Marvel was publishing the brand new Day era of Spider-Man, not just the story arc, but the larger 100 issues, in Google SketchUp, someone in the Spider-Man office, one of the artists, built a 3D model of Peter Parker's apartment interior. And that file was shared with all the artists so that any scene that took place in Peter's apartment would be really consistent. And that's 2008. And so, not knowing anything else about the work of the sort of digital work of Jeremy Roberts in comics, if this is 4 years earlier, yeah, maybe someone was building a model or using a model.
I don't know if you're about to say this, but the most striking thing about these covers really is that covers are typically, and particularly for something like Snake Eyes, he's a ninja, are going to be quite, either it's going to be a character sort of in a hero pose or an action pose or something quite exciting. These are very quiet and contemplative covers.
Yeah. And there's a lot that doesn't work for me in this miniseries, but I do think artistically, editorially, the approach for the covers is great. There's another small decision that's happening on the covers where the logo, the actual letter forms for the words Snake Eyes Declassified, these are both a stencil font. And the Declassified one is that standard military stencil font. Maybe both of them are. Compare this to the logo for Master and Apprentice or Master and Apprentice 2, which is very Japanese. And considering that half of this Declassified story takes place in Japan with ninja stuff, one might expect not the sort of army, painted stencil on metal lettering treatment. It's not good or bad. I do like the title logo. What I'm saying is, whether intentional or not, it sort of leans the miniseries in one direction or the other.
The declassified sort of stencil component is actually consistent between the various Declassified series. So that same treatment is used on the Scarlet Declassified and GI Joe Declassified. That's the word declassified.
And also Dreadnoks?
And Dreadnoks. That's the Declassified in that red kind of box.
All right. So where do we start?
So normally we would, I think, go into a plot breakdown. I've not bothered to write one, but I think I can summarize it in a few short sentences that essentially what we're seeing here is a Snake Eyes origin story divided up thematically into 3 parts. Issue 2 is a sort of road trip with Snake Eyes and Cobra Commander. Not that he is Cobra Commander at that point.
And we don't, and it's not confirmed to us. It is suggested, or we're supposed to assume.
Well, heavily inferred if we already know the Snake Eyes origin story, and sort of following a slightly sort of vigilante road trip across states, and sort of concluding on their sort of friendship fracturing. Issues 3, 4, and 5 is the expanded ninja story of Snake Eyes, moving into the Arashikage, home, training with alongside Snake Eyes and the various masters, and that's all falling apart at the end with the assassination of the hired master. And then the final issue is essentially the GI Joe story of Snake Eyes, where he is recruited, goes on that fateful mission where the helicopter crash occurs, and he is sort of transformed into Snake Eyes as we know him. But in parallel, there's also an origin story for Cobra happening in the background. Shall we kind of tackle each kind of one of those 3 story arcs in turn? Is that one way of doing it?
Yeah, and we can probably, if you're listening to this episode, everyone, you have listened to the previous episode where we talked about issue 1, but it might be worth just spending a half a sentence to remind you that issue 1 was about Snake Eyes in Vietnam, with the LRP group, with the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol group.
Now, issue 2 is I think the most fascinating of the 6 issues to me, because every other issue pretty much, it expands an existing known key, pivotal touchstone point of the Snake Eyes origin story, which has been spread, seeded across Larry Hammer's ARA run. Whereas issue 2 is essentially all new and just playing into this idea that Cobra Commander reaches out to Snake Eyes following the death of his brother, who was the drunk driver who killed Snake Eyes' family, and that they have this time together where they sort of seek, I guess, slightly vigilante kind of directionless justice, which concludes with them confronting the judge who sort of Cobra Commander puts the blame on for his brother's life going awry. It's unique in that it's so different to the kind of the established Snake Eyes origins that we know of, that in terms of the other issues are very familiar. This is sort of very different and is all new, effectively.
Yeah. Can you parse that? Because earlier you said essentially all new, and just now you said effectively all new. Is it 100% all new, or is it 98%? If it's not all new, is it like one panel? Is it one bit of dialogue?
It's all new, apart from leaning into some of those components that we know about Snake Eye, Cobra Commander. Attaching this weight to his brother's death, and the blame on that. So that's kind of the seed that I see this being built around. In terms of
setting, action, dialogue, issue 2 is 100% new.
Mm-hmm.
And Santalucia's art, he pencils the other 5 issues, and about half of this issue, and this is the issue where Robert Atkins, is this Atkins' first professional GI Joe work?
I believe that's the case. Yeah, his first work on GI Joe. So.
Okay.
Robert Atkins' new editor, Michael O'Sullivan from Savannah College, and Michael offered Robert his first solo job, which was how he ended up as penciler on Snake Eye's Declassified, and then it all went from there.
If you give me a moment, I can guess sort of who's drawing which pages. But the good news is that the two of them are a good match for each other, whether that's an editor picking Atkins because he already draws like Santalucia, or whether he's trying to draw like the guy who's doing the rest of this miniseries. I go back to my initial response to this miniseries, which is, I'll try not to say this every other sentence. I really want Larry Hama to be the one writing this. And if someone is going to just retell what we already know, or retell what we already know in chronological order and add 40% new material so that, I don't know, 3 issues worth becomes 6 issues worth, I also want that to be Larry Hama. I think in terms of giving this version of Snake Eyes and this version of Cobra Commander some weight and motivation, I think this sort of vigilante stuff that's happening sort of across the heartland of America is a good motivator. It doesn't feel like G.I. Joe to me. It doesn't feel like a G.I. Joe flashback. Snake Eyes is narrating it in his diary or his journal for 3 pages, and it's like this. The conceit is that Snake Eyes is going to talk in this story because he can. So it's like, okay, well, I sort of already lost that argument. I don't think the character should talk even when he can, because that's sort of what we know of this character. In our reality, he doesn't speak. And, in modern day, when he has an adventure, he could write things down, he could use sign language, but he tends not to, or he doesn't at all. It's not that he can't talk, it's that he can't and he doesn't. So now he can and he does a lot. And, if he's also sort of not the person we know yet, then maybe he's going to talk a lot more or a lot differently. And it just sort of breaks up for me, because I think it turns out I don't want to read a lot about pre-Snake Eyes. That just the flashbacks we got were enough. And also, it feels too much like it feels too fanish. That's not the word. I think it might be worthwhile to see Snake Eyes have some ups and downs before he joins the Joes. I think it might be interesting to have Cobra Commander have some ups and downs before he forms Cobra. But wait, they teamed up? And also, wait, Cobra Commander followed Snake Eyes? So, Mark, is this where you tell me that Cobra Commander would be following Snake Eyes because he's blaming Snake Eyes' family for the car accident?
Yeah, so I guess in the Larry Hama canon, he somehow sort of twists his logic to put the blame of his brother's death on Snake Eyes because his family was driving to get him from the airport at the time of the crash. Yeah, and that obviously doesn't make logical sense, but in the from that sort of distorted perspective, it does. And And at this point in time, in this story, he's not necessarily attaching all of that blame to Snake Eyes, but more to the judge who sentenced him and put him down the wrong track as he saw it, and that led to his drinking and the eventual car crash. So that's So I guess that once the judge has died and Snake Eyes has sort of spurned him, then now he's sort of refocused that negativity back towards Snake Eyes.
The character connections in the Hama G.I. Joe, how Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Zartan, Firefly, Cobra Commander, Baroness, and some siblings, how they all connect. Getting it over 12 years was, and also never knowing when we were going to get a little more, was fun and believable, dare I say. And maybe it was, just shy of being unbelievable. And if you add one more thing, like, oh yeah, there were the 3 weeks at Cobra Commander, pre-Cobra Commander and pre-Snake Eyes, beat up bad guys and, gave money, robbed from the rich and gave to the poor in the heartland of America. This might be totally unfair to Brandon Jerwa, because maybe if Hama had done it, I would say, no, that's totally believable. I love it. It's great. More. But, maybe sort of the more you look at it, the less it sort of stands up. And if you look at it carefully across 6 issues and you add a bunch more, maybe it really doesn't stand up. So because it's always been convenient, like a soap opera, that Joe and Cobra and the ninja have all these connections. Mm-hmm. And, I think back to, I'll refer to issue 126 a little later, but I think the actual plotting in this issue is good. That someone finds Snake Eyes at his lowest and sort of saves him, and then Snake Eyes rejects that person. But that is Cobra Commander doesn't work for me. And then there are just a lot of details. There's too much exposition. I feel like every issue in this, someone is explaining what happened in the previous issue or halfway earlier in this issue. And the dialogue is too on the nose, but this is issue 2. So we're on page 1, 2, 3, 4. Tommy's walking away and he says, there's a wordless panel, a silent panel. And then he says, I see, I can't make you come back to Japan with me. And then, deep breath, I'm really sorry that you lost your parents and your sister in that wreck, but it's been 6 months now. If you ever wake up from this bad dream you've created for yourself, all you have to do is say the word and I'll be there. That's what friends do, and maybe someday you'll remember that. The meaning of that exposition is good. And maybe you'd actually say to your friend, your sort of, combat brother, I'm so sorry about your family. But he mentions the parents and the sister and the car accident. And, in the story that happened 6 pages ago, just at the end of the previous issue. And yes, people read this as a 6-issue miniseries over 6 months. But I feel like this kind of thing keeps happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what bugged me the most about that sequence?
How the bartender hands them the glasses on page 2, because I have a note. Page 2, panel 4. That's not how bartenders present drinks to patrons.
Yep. And that isn't what a pint glass looks like. A pint glass does not look like a transparent, oversized torch.
Flashlight. Our American friends.
Flashlight.
Yes. Yeah. Torch, flashlight. There's good body language on pages 2 and 3 between the bartender, Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow. I do think it's earned that Snake Eyes has a beard and mustache, but I just want to go back to this refrain of mine, which is, if you put a Caucasian woman, a beautiful Caucasian woman with long, straight black hair in a G.I. Joe scene, and you give her circular glasses, I'm gonna think it's Baroness. If you put a in shape Caucasian man who's blonde in a G.I. Joe scene, and he has a blonde beard and mustache, I think he's rock and roll. And yes, nothing about this story points that this could possibly be rock and roll. And rock and roll does show up for a panel or two later. This is definitely Snake Eyes having grown facial hair, but
my thought that I had about this, which is a bit of a tangent, was that when I was watching Stranger Things. You're a Stranger Things fan, Tim?
I've seen the first season or two.
There was an early episode, I think, in the second season, which I think from a quick Google was probably episode 7 of second season. There was this sort of side story for 11 where she goes off on this.
Oh, she goes to like Chicago.
Tangent. Yeah, she goes to another city. She meets a gang of kids.
And
they go on this crazy adventure. And then by the end of the episode, she's come back home and sort of status quo is pretty much returned. And it just feels so out of kilter with the rest of it. And just like you could snip that episode and everything else would still make sense.
Or that episode needed to be like a 3-episode arc.
Mm-hmm. And it felt a bit like this for me for this episode. Like this is interesting, but it just feels so different and so not of a part of the rest that it just creates a bit of a hurdle for me to really invest in it. And I found it a bit a strange issue.
I wonder if maybe Talking Joe fans and listeners can chime in. I feel like to some degree the intended or ideal audience for this miniseries is someone who hadn't read the Marvel issues or had only read a few of them. And for those people, I imagine these 6 issues are more satisfying. Yeah. Issue 2 doesn't feel like the Strangers Thing side mission. maybe if fans, if you are that person, let us know how it worked for you in 2005, or if you're reading along now and we're not making you too grumpy about it, let us know.
Actually, I read recently this book, Larry Hammer Conversations, edited by Christopher Irving. And in the introduction to that book, Christopher writes, by the end of the series' original run, Snake Eyes has proven instrumental in the origins of Firefly, Zartan, Baroness, Cobra Commander, and by association, all of Cobra and G.I. Joe, Storm Shadow, and Scarlet. From a plot's perspective, it defies believability. But, dispersed issues at a time, and through characters and personalities established over that run, it somehow seems less fantastic and unbelievable. If they were all sort of one on top of another, it would probably break the story. But because they're seeded out so periodically across the story, it's somehow the rest of the narrative across the whole of the issues and everything else that's happening carries that weight of the unbelievability. So it sort of makes sense, and you kind of go with it when it's across 155 issues. But when it's all together in one place across 6 with some additional elements included, maybe the sort of some of those coincidences around the story sort of just, it creaks a little bit more.
Yeah. In the previous episode, we referred to Hama's gracious introduction to the collection of this miniseries, where he says, I didn't write it, but it's good and the characters sound right. And as a counterpoint, I want to bring up something. Hama did an interview with the website manwithoutfear.com, which is this amazing Daredevil fan website with dozens of interviews. Because Larry Hama worked on, I think it's 3 issues of Daredevil. And it's not a long interview. And at the end, Kuljit Mithra, who conducts the interview, and I think it's his website, says, this is 2001. He says, do you know if any comic companies are looking into developing G.I. Joe again? And also, would you be interested in writing it? And Hama says, it pops up occasionally. Everybody thinks they can do it better than me. Good luck to them. And his short and to the point answers in interviews, I think sometimes come across as him being rude or a jerk. And I think he's just being really efficient because he's got to do a bunch of interviews and it's easier to give short answers than long answers. And as I read this miniseries, several times I thought, this isn't bad dialogue. This dialogue to me doesn't feel like G.I. Joe. And in some cases, I thought this dialogue wouldn't be here if it were my G.I. Joe. That this scene wouldn't be explained, or this scene wouldn't be described, or this scene would just play out visually, or like my point I made a few minutes ago, someone's describing something that I have just read 20 pages ago, and I don't want them to recap it. I showed Hama an issue from sort of the end of the Chuck Dixon run of G.I. Joe at IDW. And when he was no longer writing that continuity, but he was writing A Real American Hero, because I liked the art. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I don't really want to look at this because it's sort of not my G.I. Joe. And I have thought of other times when a writer has, like in the early and middle 2000s, the writer Stephen Grant wrote a column at comicbookresources.com. And I think it was called Master of the Obvious. And sometimes he would review comics that his local store gave him or that someone mailed him. And someone mailed him the first Garth Ennis Punisher miniseries. Not just an issue, but the whole book with the 12 issues, right? Welcome Back, Frank, because Stephen Grant wrote the first Punisher miniseries in 85. And online in a column, Grant said, hey, whoever sent me the Punisher book, thanks, but I don't read characters that I've worked on after I work on them. Huh. And I think the fans in the crowd might think, oh, no, Stephen Grant, don't you love the Punisher? And maybe the answer is, well, I'm a professional and I will write Punisher if I'm paid to write Punisher. But I'm a professional and I need to make money, so I'm looking for jobs that pay. And, as a hobby, I'm probably going to read novels or read history or watch the news or, whatever, go hiking or something. And I think about this not just sort of Hama, G.I. Joe, other people writing G.I. Joe phenomenon, but other writers who have strong affiliations with certain comics characters or titles, and then other people writing them after. And it's taken me a long time to be able to sort of, if I'm reading a G.I. Joe story, be able to detect if it feels like Hama or not. And I don't know that I can always put it into words. But reading this miniseries, I thought, this doesn't feel like Hama.
So, Tim, what about if we take a trip across to Japan, where in issues 3, 4, and 5, we are seeing that Arashikage story that we know so well from the flashbacks that were seeded in the main run. How do you think that all comes together?
You start. I just talked for a while.
So, I mean, I love the original story, and I think a good job is done of knitting it together because you do have like the origin, you do have the Zartan story, and then later on you also have the Faceless Master story from Firefly. And I think it is brought together quite neatly. It does sort of feel like a one sort of seamless story and very in keeping with the original story. It may be a little bit more tension between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow than maybe I would have guessed myself or sort of felt myself, but that's okay. I think that it's sort of then there's expanded a little bit more. There's the introduction of this jealous master. I think it's called Kano, and that feels in keeping with the rest of the themes and the story. It's not jarring, and it also I think goes some way to explaining that there's a Arashikage kind of offshoot, which gives us some of those red ninjas later on who didn't he didn't appreciate Snake Eyes taking such an active role in their clan. So generally, I think it works well in telling a joined up story for the most part. So it maybe isn't as satisfying to someone who maybe knows that story already, but as something that you could give to somebody to give them a a very concise 3-issue arc explaining that story, it's probably a neat way of doing it.
I would rather give them 26 and 27 from the Marvel run. You know, Jerwa's doing something thankless here, and he does it well. I can appreciate the construction. It's sort of, you know, I don't like the architecture, but the contractor who built the building, you know, did a good job. The building stands up. It's not going to fall over. But I don't like how the building looks, you know, the colors, the materials, the styling. And I don't like what the building's being used for. You know, like, oh, that company's moving in? I'm not going to go to that building. There's my analogy. The series takes a little bit of a turn artistically with issue 4 because the second half of it is colored by Jensen. So issues 4 and 5 and 6, the coloring gets busier and I don't like it. Every panel has lots and lots of white highlights, and it's you know, I compare it to the work that John Rauch is doing in the first 3 issues, and I don't love that coloring, but it's, you know, fine. And the second half of the series, things get too busy, and it sort of doesn't matter what the scene is, you know, inside, outside, daytime, nighttime, fight. You know, I haven't reread issue 84 in at least 10 years. And reading this miniseries just made me want to go read issue 84. And you know, 144 and 126. And I remember 126 when it came out surprised me, and it was also a little silly cuz that's that 2 issues where the ninjas are making a scorpion, you know, like like cheerleaders making a pyramid. And I guess that's Hama both having fun and also being very serious. Like, no, ninja can do all these amazing things, but also, you know, writing this ongoing action drama, you know, fight, soap opera, chess pieces thing. But I sometimes think of, is it in the letters page to 126, or is it in the letters page 2 or 3 months later when people are writing in about 26? And Hama's definitely answering the letters that month because he refers to himself in the first person. I don't know if he signs off at the end as, you know, Dash Larry, but he's talking about the blurred photograph and who that other person was this whole time, right? It was Firefly, and he says something like, I've been saving that one for years. I think years is even italicized. And when that was published, I thought, oh man, how great. But also I thought, wait, Firefly's a ninja too? There's an awful lot of ninjas here. And so even at the time, I thought, okay, 80%, I love it. 20%, But, you know, why not? I think the point you made earlier is a good one about sort of if the stuff is doled out over time, you accept it, and if it all happens at once, it might crack or fall apart.
Yeah.
And once again, I'm aware I made this point with issue 1 that in these middle issues 4, 5, 6, there are a bunch of panels that are redrawn compositions from some Marvel issues. And that is both fun, but also, you know, maybe in comparison, the new stuff doesn't look as good. And then also something that I think I didn't bring up in the previous episode, the final credit on all 6 of these issues says based on and inspired by the works of Larry Hama. And yes, he did write all of the stories, and yes, he did draw 26, but this does pull from other issues that other people drew. And I think it would be proper to, if you're going to give Hama some credit, give them some credit too. You know, William Rosado, Andrew Wildman. Is it anything from 27, right? Is 27 Frank Springer?
I think that's right. I think there was, yeah.
And then just another little point I wanted to make in terms of sort of, you know, the comparison maybe isn't flattering. The fight at the end of issue 3, the backgrounds mostly drop out, and it's fine. It's not a bad fight, but it's not an awesome fight. Like, Here are the ingredients for the awesomest G.I. Joe fight. Okay. Flashback, ninja, the other ninja, at the Ninja Clan, and also Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow were there. And, it's sort of ho-hum.
Yeah. Shall we take our plane back from Japan over to the States to issue 6, where we see a bit of the early days of G.I. Joe?
Yeah. You go first.
So actually, it's the sort of back end of issue 5. It's from the Snake Eyes origin of 27, where Hawk and Stalker come and recruit Snake Eyes into the team, and then in issue 6, it's kind of the early days of the G.I. Joe team, and it's the apart from some color added by I think some of the Cobra origins aspects, it's a pretty much straight retelling of pre-existing knowledge from the previous origin stories, where Snake Eyes is training with the team, getting to know Scarlet, and then they go on that ill-fated mission where the helicopters crash. Snake Eyes has his face burnt and writes CM in the sand, Charlie Mike, to continue that rescue of George Straw Hacker. Fairly straight retelling with a couple of sort of corrective elements. I think in the original issue, which was that
144 with the Vipers?
144. Yeah, it had the Vipers in there, which sort of wasn't keeping with the sort of the chronology of when there was Vipers started appearing. So they've swapped those out for Cobra Troopers.
Can I clarify this? Can I dig into this?
Go on.
When 144 was released, it's an expansion of Snake Eyes flashbacks from 26 and 27, and Snake Eyes and Stalker and a couple others rescue this hostage who's an important person. And in this scene, which William Rosado draws in 1993, there are Vipers, 1986 Vipers, and Televipers. And as Mark just alluded to, Vipers wouldn't have existed then. It would have been regular Cobra soldiers, Cobra officers in blue. And in redrawing the scene here in Snake Eyes Declassified 6, Santalucia draws a Cobra soldier in blue, Cobra soldiers in blue, acting out these things and getting shot and blown up instead of Vipers. And so what has happened here is Devil's Due has retconned a retcon, because every single story, right? Hama has said this at conventions and in interviews, and I think it's a little confusing. He says, well, it's all a retcon, right? And what he's saying is, since I make it up as I go, anytime I want to throw in something from, quote, before, I'm just making it fit, but I didn't have that in mind back then, and now I'm revealing it. I'm making it up now, and I'm making it up so that it fits back then. So when we find out who Snake Eyes was rescuing in that hostage mission after the helicopter crash, in a later issue, which is an expansion of the helicopter crash in an earlier issue, when Hama is retconning it, so there's more story there, right? Whether he writes it in the script or Rosado draws it wrong on his own, the editor doesn't catch it. It's the wrong kind of Cobra soldier. So I love this. That it's a Cobra. I think I've mentioned this twice to our occasional co-host Jay Cordray in various episodes of Talking Joe. Like, oh, the Viper is showing up in 144. It wouldn't be Vipers.
And it's funny, actually. I'm just looking back to 144, and there's that panel in the Declassified issue where Snake Eyes is throwing the knife and throwing Star simultaneously to take down the Vipers / Cobra Troopers. And that panel where he's throwing them, it's pretty much a direct swipe from the original, but there's another almost direct swipe of the trooper going to the door, saying, do you hear something out there? I'll check. And he's going to open up the door, and in the original, it's a Viper, And in this one, it's a Cobra Trooper, so it's funny that it's almost a direct swipe, but they've literally sort of redrawn the character.
This is for my, I do like modern computer coloring when it's done a certain way. It's fun to compare these two pages where in 2005, the art and color together are more modern and a little flashier, and the paper's different. And I'm almost always ready to take older paper with older color over newer paper and newer color. But if you listeners, if you have 144 and Declassified 6 in front of you, you can make this comparison too.
Just laughing at, because in 144 there's these Vipers. They're playing a game of poker or something as Snake Eyes comes and rudely interrupts, and two of the Vipers have got like aces sort of hidden about their person, so they're all sort of clearly cheating at their card game. It's I've never noticed that before. It's a great little detail. And then as this mission wraps up, Snake Eyes is in hospital, being looked after by Doc, which is a sort of a continuation of the previous retcon, because in issue 144 he's sort of shown to be part of the GI Joe support staff at that point in time. So it's a consistent use of Doc sort of from the early days of GI Joe.
Right, and to put this fine point on it, right, the story that takes place before, quote, 1982, Doc hadn't joined the team yet, because Doc is a what, 83 or 84 figure?
Yeah, 1 year after, yeah.
And in this flashback, there he is. So I was struck at the beginning of issue 6, on page 2, the brass come downstairs and are introduced to the original Joes, and Snake Eyes is not in black.
Yeah.
He's in green. He's in... and so Jerwa is adding this element to the story, which I think is okay, where after Snake Eyes is injured, then a box gets shipped to the hospital just before the mission where the helicopters are going to crash. And Scarlet says, "Hey, special delivery from the pit. Hawk said you wanted this," right? And it is in the 3 final pages of this whole miniseries where Snake Eyes is in black for the first time in his GI Joe uniform, not in any kind of ninja costume in Japan as a student. So this final scene, these 3 pages, right, where Snake Eyes is looking out the window, he's got bandages on his head, he's in I think he is in the hospital. Maybe he's in a rehab center that's not quite the hospital.
Yeah, it's on the first page of that sequence. It's the U.S. Advanced Surgical Recovery Facility, Burn Unit Recovery. Okay.
So Scarlet and Stalker visit him, and I'm a little, I don't know how I feel about this. Mark, tell me how I feel about this. The final 2 pages, the note that this miniseries ends on is CM, Charlie Mike. That he puts on the costume, and Scarlet says, "Also, if you stay, I promise you'll never be alone again." And Snake Eyes picks up a pad and a pen, and he writes something on it, and he hands it to her, and Stalker says, "What does it say?" And she says, "It says Charlie Mike." And you turn the page, and it's a splash of Snake Eyes standing there with his mask for the first time, Snake Eyes version 1 mask, and his black tunic, and his fists are clenched, and an off-panel word balloon has Scarlet finishing the line, "Continue the mission," and then it says on the bottom, "The beginning." And I think that's a good ending. And goodness knows, ending any story is hard. Ending a 6-issue miniseries is hard. Ending a 6-issue miniseries that's inventing new stuff and piecing together old stuff is hard. I think it's a good ending. I also wish it was a little different, because Charlie Mike is a note that this story has already had, or a beat that this story has already had. And the fact that Snake Eyes doesn't say anything here, that's good. The fact that the the idea of it is that he's joining the team. They're going to keep doing it. He's a Joe. The story is really just beginning. Those are all great. But the actual sort of 2 words, the military code, Charlie Mike, it reminds me of this comment that I've made where many things are repeated in this miniseries. And let me go back to issue 5, which is down here. So halfway through issue 5, we're out of Japan and we're up on the mountain, and Snake Eyes is by himself building his cabin and chopping wood, and he's got a wolf. And you turn the page and two army guys pull up in a Jeep, and 2 locals are pointing them in the right direction. And the mailman says, "Oh, they say he's some kind of werewolf," right? And then you turn the page and where did it go? Someone says werewolf again. Snake Eyes says to them, "Did I make this up?"
he says, they say he's some kind of werewolf. Then he says, werewolf tail barks at the moon, even got some sort of mark on his wrist.
Okay.
And they say, what do you make of that? Werewolf talk.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Suspicious drivel. You going first. Snake Eyes? It's just a wolf.
Sorry, I'm misremembering it. So in my mind, where I'm just ready to shake my fist at Brandon Jerwa's script, Snake Eyes says something like, "It's not like I'm a werewolf, guys." And then they all chuckle and they're like, "Oh, you're not a werewolf." And that word keeps getting used. That's not what happens. I'm sorry, Brandon Jerwa. But I do feel like just, wolf and werewolf gets used 4 times in 3 pages. What do you make of all this werewolf talk? Yeah, that, you might say a word several times, but I really want the dialogue honed in.
And the other thing about this issue 6 is there's this sort of in parallel to the early days of GI Joe, it's the early days of Cobra being formed, and there's a sort of bit of an Easter egg sequence there on is it page 3?
Page 5, panel 2.
On page 5, yeah, page 5, panel 2. There is a circular table with 4 gentlemen there who are the new supporters of the New World Order, with Cobra Commander there in just a blue suit. Do you recognize, or can you work out who those 4 people at the table are?
So I can do some of this. The first person looks like Dr. Mindbender, because he has Dr. Mindbender's mustache, and he's bald. The second person is not only Dr. Venom, it's Emiliano Santalucia doing a very good impression of how Mike Vosberg drew Dr. Venom. The third person, I can't tell who it is in the story, but I think this is a character actor. Is this Sidney Greenstreet?
I don't know.
For those of you that don't know, Sidney Greenstreet is an actor who's best known as appearing in The Maltese Falcon, but he was in many movies, and maybe it's not him, but looking at this face, this is some actor. This is some likeness, and the bow tie, something about this, I think, and there's a bowler hat. This is someone. And I don't know if Brandon Jerwa is just letting it be a white man with a grudge who's going to give money to nascent Cobra Commander, or if this is Brandon Jerwa thinking this is sort of a particular person in 1980, 1981 in the world of G.I. Joe who we're never going to see again. And then the person on the right, Mark, I don't think it's Tomax or Zaymot, but I can't help but think it reminds me of them because it's a guy with brown hair with a part, and he's wearing a jacket and tie. But for that matter, Cobra Commander is wearing the same jacket and tie in this scene. So
maybe they're both makes the same one. Okay, you got 1 out of 4 there, Tim.
It wasn't Mindbender?
It wasn't Mindbend, but it's a sort of a fair guess. So on the left, it is Vance Wigfield.
Oh, very good, very good.
So he's the drill sergeant of Cobra's rank and file who first appeared in G.I. Joe issue 4 as the main antagonist in there.
And of course, that story is called Operation Wingfield.
To his right, it's obviously Dr. Venom, Cobra's mad scientist, who first appeared in G.I. Joe issue 10. To his right is Derek Sutherland, Cobra's first weapons supplier, who appeared in G.I. Joe issue 9. And
Marvel issue 9?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And to his right is Brian Hassel, a State Department diplomat with Cobra loyalties, who also appeared in G.I. Joe issue 9.
Huh. Well, that's fun.
So it's those early characters that didn't have toys, that Larry Hama and Co. were just making them up to fill out a cast of baddies.
Wait a second.
It might have been Stephen Grant writing.
Yeah. Issue 9 is Stephen Grant.
As I said it, I thought it's probably Stephen Grant writing that issue, isn't it? It's The Diplomat by Stephen Grant.
I just grabbed my... Oh, yeah, okay. There's the guy with the bowler hat. All right, very good. Oh, yeah, that's a good scene. Yeah, I just grabbed my... It's not Classic Volume 1. It's just G.I. Joe Volume 1, because I have the Marvel printing.
Yep.
That's cool. I'll say something grumpy. The thing that I was most interested in reading in issue 5 was the 4-page preview for the Sigma 6 comic book at the end of this issue. And I was delighted by some of the ads for other things that Devil's Due was publishing, and there were some new figures that were available online at HasbroToyShop.com. There were some ads for the next Transformers crossover. There were some, many months ago and several weeks ago, when I knew that this miniseries was coming up, I thought, oh, I don't want to read this, because I don't want something that Jerwa has invented, has added to the canon, to get stuck in my head, and I will mix it in, and then on an episode of Talking Joe, or just by myself as a G.I. Joe fan, I will think back to the overall Larry Hama G.I. Joe story and recall something that wasn't Hama, it was Jerwa. But also, that's not such a big deal, right? It's all stories, and just because one story happens doesn't mean another story didn't happen, right? If a sequel or a prequel happens, it doesn't ruin what's already been released on DVD or published. But I do want to bring up this overall topic, which we talked about when we looked at Silent Prelude, which was the 5-page story that Hama and Ron Wagner created for the collection of this Snake Eyes Declassified miniseries. And that is this idea of just because you can, should you, right? And does every moment of story need to be told? And I'm going to, as a parallel, bring up 2 quick Star Wars examples, right? Because Star Wars is so rife for this kind of thing. Because in the way that Snake Eyes Declassified fills in some gaps, so many Star Wars stories over the years have filled in gaps for other ones, right? Comic books, movies, streaming series. So when the Star Wars Special Edition was released to theaters in 97, the exciting part of it was that we got to see Star Wars again in a movie theater, and that the picture and sound had been cleaned up, right? There were, and then this one you can take or leave. There were new visual effects, right? I think erasing or minimizing matte lines so that when you shoot 2 models separately and you composite them together on film, and it kind of looks like you shot 2 things separately, because even though the scales make sense, one of them is sort of like grayed out, or it's got this thick line around it. I'm okay with that. The big thing about that first movie, the Special Edition, was I'm skipping whether or not Greedo shoots first, because I actually want to get to the scene after that, right? Greedo says, Han Solo, you own Jabba the Hutt some money. And Han Solo says, I'm figuring it out. And then someone shoots someone and Han leaves. And then he walks outside and there's this new scene, which was cut from the original release, where actor Harrison Ford talks to a stand-in And with 1990s visual effects, they added in Jabba the Hutt. And so right after Han Solo says to Greedo at gunpoint, "I'll figure it out," he goes outside and Jabba says, "Hey, it's me, you owe me money." And Han Solo says, "Yeah, I'm figuring it out." And the reason why that scene was cut for 1977 is because it doesn't add anything. It is the same beat. It is the same note. Hey, you owe that guy some money. I know. Hey, you owe me some money. I know. And so in terms of pacing and narrative, that scene is bad. Whether or not you agree with how Jabba looks and Harrison Ford stepping over the tail or, whatever, right? It was fun to see it. That really should have been some kind of DVD extra, not in the movie. Okay, and then example number 2. Way back when, in 2002, Star Wars Episode 2, Attack the Clones, was released to theaters. It's very exciting. Not my favorite movie at all. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, is played by Ewan McGregor, is investigating this mystery because there are all of a sudden these clones. And no one talks about whether that's good or bad, which is weird. But let's skip that for a minute. And it turns out he finds that some Jedi some years ago put in an order for millions of clones. And it was really weird to me then, and it has always been really weird to me that they don't really talk about this in that movie. It's like, who was this? Is this someone from episode 1? Is this a name that I've heard? Is this like someone that we didn't trust? Is this someone who turned bad? Is this someone we kicked out? They don't really talk about it. And then you see episode 3, and between the end of episode 2 and the beginning of episode 3, that guy does show up. It's Count Dooku, and he's playing both sides. And it's sort of explained, not satisfyingly. And I always sort of wondered, like, oh, okay, because so Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 2 goes to the Jedi library, and it's like, wait, someone deleted the file where, like, someone went to this planet and put in an order for millions of clones? Huh. Okay, so fast forward, listeners, to early 2023, and I'm watching Tales of the Jedi on Disney+. And one of the episodes is about Count Dooku, sometime between episode 1 and 2, literally going to the Jedi library. He looks over his shoulder left and right, and he pushes a button, and this little hologram of is it Camino shows up, and he's like, "Computer, delete all records of Camino. Hoo hoo hoo. I'm going to put in an order for millions of clones." And on the one hand, I thought, okay, good. They're finally showing it to us. On the other hand, I thought, man, I don't need to see this, because it was sort of explained, not well, and we did a lot of inferencing, and there have been dozens and dozens of hours of story told since then about the result of this. Lots of Jedi and separatists and clones and battle droids smashing against each other. And then because it's Star Wars and it has to be really on the nose, I believe, if I'm remembering this Tales of the Jedi episode accurately, I believe this happens seconds before Count Dooku walks outside and bumps into someone, and they talk about Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral. It's like, remember the thing that happened at the end of episode 1? Okay, well, now I know exactly when this scene takes place. Okay, so how does this relate to GI? How does this relate to GI Joe? We've sort of said this over and over between the Silent Prelude episode, the Snake Eyes Declassified issue 1 episode, and this episode. Not every element of story is worth telling, and not every scene, not every sort of moment in your life is. The point I want to make is, X-Men comics, G.I. Joe comics, Star Wars programming. In the last 20 years, we've gotten, as fans, really lucky that many, many, many additional stories and wrinkles and details of stories have gotten retold and expanded upon. And I've started to find that the majority of the time I don't need it. I'm not going to get into the Obi-Wan Kenobi streaming series, but that is a much larger example of, do you really like this story that's adding something that we didn't know was there, or do you not? Do you like that they tried it, but it didn't work for you? Do you like that they tried it and it did work for you? Do you like that they tried it and it sort of worked for you, right? And that's a much bigger chunk than sort of one scene in a Tales of the Jedi short. And so for the purposes of Talking Joe, I'm glad to have read Snake Eyes Declassified. And I like that Mark is here to fact check me and quiz me and bounce ideas off of. But, if IDW was going to get around to reprinting more of the Devil's Due stuff, I'm fine they didn't get to this. And if the next publisher has a plan to republish all of the stuff that's come before it, Marvel and Devil's Due and IDW, I'm not pushing for this to get reprinted fast.
And in normally at the end of the episode, we would sort of give a Yo Joe Cola marking. I don't really want to give a mark for this one because it's too many things. Like, what hat would you want to put on to actually give the mark for? So in terms of the covers, they're great. In terms of the art, it's fine. It does a quite solid job. It sort of, takes the best of the original stories and sort of, takes consistent style across the piece. Yeah, some of the modern coloring is a little bit, jarring, but hey ho. In terms of the writing, Brandon Jerwa does a pretty good job at bringing it all together. Looking at it standalone, the bits that he adds are fine, and his dialogue generally is good. But as a GI Joe book and as a Snake Eyes book, is it too much in terms of narration and dialogue? So in terms of the overall package, I think it's fine. In terms of, does it add anything to me as a fan who sort of loves most of the original material already? It doesn't add an awful lot. If you were coming into it fresh, not knowing a huge amount of G.I. Joe and not wanting to wade through all of that existing content, or possibly not having access to all of that original content, is it a reader-friendly, accessible way to get into that lore and understand some of that backstory between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow? Yeah, probably. I wouldn't, it's maybe not a bad, it's not a bad story to take to understand that. But as you say, why not just take issue 26 and 27 and read that as your starting point instead?
Also, to sort of parallel your point before about if you read it all at once, it might sort of look silly. Part of what makes the ninja stuff so powerful is that it's half or a quarter of the overall story. There's also all the military stuff, and then the sort of fantastical stuff like, eco warriors. And part of why, not just sort of like, no, the original's better, not just that, but if you read 26, 27, 144, 126, you're getting this other stuff too. You're getting people in tanks and a castle in Scotland and, this underground base. And as I read this Snake Eyes Declassified miniseries and I get to the final pages, or the early pages of issue 6, where I see the pit and the original 13, I think, oh yeah, that's what I was missing. And then I turn the page and there's this sort of blue scene, because early Cobra is so blue, underground. And it's sort of like, oh, I love hot dogs. I love hot dogs. I love hot dogs. And for Snake Eyes Declassified, I've been eating hot dogs, but only with mustard. And then in the final issue, I also get ketchup. Like, oh, that's what I wanted. I wanted hot dogs with mustard and ketchup. And yes, it's not false advertising. The miniseries is called Snake Eyes Declassified. And, it's his most popular character, and you can exploit that and sell more of that. And this was not instead of regular issues of G.I. Joe. So it's not at all unfair. But even in this story, I want more of the other stuff. I'm a little distracted by the Arashikage logo showing up on the arrow. Do you have 26, 27 in front of you, Mark? The logo's the cover to issue 5 of Snake Eyes Declassified. The arrow, the bloody arrow through the post, has a little Ninja Clan logo on it. And then in that issue, or the next issue, when Storm Shadow's practicing and he shoots an arrow through an arrow, it's got it. And I feel like, and then the sword that Zartan makes has it. And Zartan's sword, the scene from issue 84, his sword looks a little sort of accentuated, accessorized, and I feel like in just these two places, this new miniseries may be sort of adding this sort of layer. Like, no, it's just an arrow. It doesn't have, like the George Washington 25-cent piece stamp on it. It doesn't have like a Cobra logo on it. It doesn't have the GI Joe eagle. It doesn't have the Arashikage hexagram on it.
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm just having a flick through 26. The Arashikage.
It's just an arrow, right?
Yeah, the Arashikage logo appears on their wrists. It appears on Snake Eyes' tunic, and it appears on Hardmaster's, like, what do you call it? Like that sort of thing that he hides behind. It's like a
screen.
Yeah, screen. But yeah, there's no logo. No, there's no logo on the arrow, and also there's a close up of the arrow on the front cover to 26 as well.
Do you have 84 near you? Is the sword that Zartan makes, is it sort of, for lack of a better word, a regular sword? Because the one that he makes here has a little bit of a serrated edge at the bottom, which sort of reminds me of, was it Diamond Direct or was it Palisades? There was a company that licensed, I don't know when, if it was right around the first G.I. Joe live action movie or before that, but you could buy a Snake Eyes sword that had the Arashikage logo on it, and it had a little stand, and this was, I don't know, 2005 or 2010, and I feel like the Snake Eyes Declassified miniseries is getting just a little bit accessorized.
Yeah, I'm looking at that 84, and the sequence of Zartan remembering that Onehashi, where he's his apprentice, it only lasts 1, 2, 3, 4.5 pages. It's a short sequence. It lives on in my mind as being a lot bigger. But yeah, them making the swords, they don't really have much in the way of close-ups. It's and they sort of show it side on, so there's not a huge amount of detail. So they've got room to imagine it.
Does the sword have that little serrated detail at its
No,
base?
but it's sort of shown side on, so it's like,
oh, okay.
You can't really see very much detailing there at all. Yeah, but it's interesting just sort of being prompted to look back on it and just see how short that sequence is, and so how much space there is to actually expand it into something a little bit.
You know what? I wanna since I've been so hard on this miniseries and on Jerwa, I want to sort of make a concession statement here, which is that, Mark, you and I have talked about how much we like G.I. Joe issue 286, which is from just a year and a half ago, and it's the Storm Shadow spotlight issue, and it's a flashback to Vietnam, and it's the LERP group, and Snake Eyes isn't speaking, and then he speaks, and it's really impactful, and you and I like that issue. And I nudged my manager at my comic shop to read it because he's a G.I. Joe fan from way back when. He doesn't read the new stuff, but he knows I'm big into it, and he knows I do the podcast, and he's happy that we carry G.I. Joe. And I said, "Oh, you're gonna like this issue. It's a good issue." And he read it, and he said, "Yeah, it's okay. I don't feel like it did anything more or better than previous Larry Hama flashbacks to Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and Stalker in Vietnam." And I said, yeah, but the bit where Snake Eyes says, no, write her the letter. And he says, yeah, but we've sort of seen that before where Snake Eyes doesn't talk until he does. And I thought, okay, that's a fair assessment. I don't think it's the best issue ever, but I think it's a very strong issue. And it really sticks out in a long run of IDW Hama issues, which don't flash back to Vietnam. But, in the same way that I'm critical of Brandon Jerwa, you can go back, but should you? Right. What my manager's comment was, this is well-trodden ground. And, for Hama to put 20 new pages into it, we only got sort of 3 new little bits. And I think that is a fair critique. So in the same way that I would say, oh, I don't want Brandon Jerwa to just go back because he can. If Hama is going to do flashbacks or reveal more stuff from the past, some of it I think could be off limits because it's well trodden.
Very good. Are we done now with Snake Eyes Declassified, Tim?
Yes.
Let us close the book on that.
I'm actually, you know what? In front of my microphone, I'm going to actually close issue 6.
Excellent stuff. So next up, we had been saying probably let's get on to America's Elite, but on your prompting, Tim, I went and bought a copy of Arashikage Showdown because I seem to have lost my previous one because of the manga-sized dimensions of the book, it wasn't with the rest of my collection and has somehow gone astray. So I think I've now got 2 copies, one which is on my bookshelf and one which is in places unknown. Shall we cover that next? Because in terms of publishing order, it is the next thing.
Sure. You know what? Even though I literally just closed issue 6, I just want to point out that the inside back cover of Snake Eyes Declassified number 6 has a letter from Devil's Due that says, "We here at Devil's Due Publishing Incorporated would like to take a moment to say thank you for supporting us over these past 5 years. We know you have a lot of choices and hope our strong quality and hard work keep you coming back for more. Thank you, DDP reader." And it's signed by Josh Blaylock and several other people, and I could figure out all their names from the signatures if you gave me a moment. And then on the bottom, it's sort of like Devil's Due Publishing letterhead. So this is a nice point in the podcast history to say, I know we sometimes jump back and forth with publishing order, but we are 5 years into Devil's Due here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, let's read that digest original graphic novel in our next episode. And then we can decide whether we should start America's Elite or chronologically, should we read the 3rd Transformers crossover?
When was that dated?
2006.
Chronologically, it's about a year into
Okay.
America's Elite.
Really? Okay. Wait, let me do this again. It's cover dated March 2006. And America's Elite
is like June.
Oh, it's 2005. Right. Is June 2005. Okay, right, sure. Yes, we should also, you can cut this because I don't think our listeners care.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason we'd want to do it earlier would be just so that we get it, we could have the solid run of America's Elite. But
yeah, let's stay roughly chronological. Let's do the showdown and then the
Okay, so it's decided next time will be Arashikage Showdown and then probably America's Elite, unless we get distracted by something else. So fantastic. Tim, as we're wrapping up, remind us, where can people find you when you are not talking to me?
We just passed 3 million views total at our YouTube page, our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. That's video essays on TV and film. My brick and mortar comic book store is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent. And you can find out more about the show at talkingjoe.co.uk, which is the website with links everywhere. If you've not yet left us a review on your favorite podcasting site, please feel free to do that, as well as like and subscribe on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the normal places, including Patreon. We're on Patreon, patreon.com, Talking Joe. A big thanks to all of our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, Shane, who are all getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. But I think that is us done. But remember that...
Nobody Be Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Hurrah! Laters.